Hello, I'm Kathleen McElroy, and today I'm going to be talking about Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So, what is Hashimoto's thyroiditis? It is the most common cause of hypothyroidism, which is the condition of having an underactive thyroid, and something I'll get to explaining in just a minute. And its hallmark is immune activity by the body against its own thyroid gland, eventually leading to the loss of function within that gland. It is an autoimmune disease. Causes for Hashimoto's are often genetic, often environmental, usually some combination, and are as a whole not very well understood. Risk factors for Hashimoto's include a family history of any sort of thyroid disease, female sex, having another autoimmune disease such as rheumatoid arthritis or type 1 diabetes. It is also sometimes triggered by an infection, pregnancy, or a very poor diet. You can see here these two drawings of the neck, and first one on the left shows you the thyroid, which is this sort of butterfly-shaped gland in your neck that secretes and regulates hormone levels throughout your whole body. The thyroid is in charge of your metabolism, your growth and development, your circulatory, your digestive, your reproductive systems, all sorts of parts throughout your body. It sends lots of hormones to tell your body what to do, how to keep you warm, how to use energy, a whole bunch of different things. And two very important hormones for the thyroid and for this presentation are named T3 and T4. If you're going to think of the thyroid as commanding a sort of army of hormones throughout your body that manage all these different processes, T3 and T4 are like the generals of that army that the thyroid uses to get its aims across. And over on the right is a goiter, which is this lumpy mass that results on the neck from a thyroid issue or disease, and also is seen in Hashimoto's. And due to the very large amount of systems that the thyroid's activities inform, the symptoms of Hashimoto's are very, very widespread. So you're looking at fatigue is a very major one. You're looking at issues with digestion, with your reproductive system, with anemia, with random sorts of aches and pains, with things just not working the way they should as your thyroid loses its function through the progression of the disease. I'm just now realizing that my face covers parts of the slides no matter what I do, so that's great, and I'll read off the one that's missing to you. But that sort of progression happens over a pretty long period of time before you get to really significant symptoms with Hashimoto's. And the beginning of this disease isn't completely clear, but it starts in the sort of storm of autoimmune response slash inflammation that's induced by Th1 helper cells. And it's an autoimmune disorder. These are cells, they're cells in your body, if you have this, that are targeting your thyroid specifically. And so lymphocytes of all kinds are going up to the thyroid. They're sticking there, they're attacking, they're doing all sorts of damage. And that is when you start seeing milder symptoms. As the thyroid is not doing so well and kind of not to the point of destruction, but still losing several parts and fighting, trying to fight off, not really even fighting, dealing with this attack by the body, the T3 and T4 levels fall. Those hormones are not being able to be secreted. The body tries to restore normal function by raising the amount of thyroid secreting hormone, TSH, saying, hey, come back, give us the stuff we need. Why aren't we doing this? Here's a signal. Keep going. And this just kind of disparity just continues down the line with the disease over time. Eventually, you can have a goiter form, although it does not always form. It is indicative of a pretty high level of damage to the thyroid and is the average time that people are diagnosed when they start seeing that bump on their neck. If you continue past that point, your thyroid's just going to continue to worsen as it loses all function. And you can eventually end up in myxedemia coma, which is very dangerous and requires immediate medical attention to survive. The history of Hashimoto's is not very long. The first account we have of Hashimoto's thyroiditis is by Dr. Hikaru Hashimoto, who published a report in a pretty prestigious German journal in 1912 on these 4 different tissues he'd sampled from 4 different women, seeing a whole bunch of lymphocytes in their goiters. And we now realize that his report of the disease and the goiters full of lymphocytes that he saw is the first piece of information we have about Hashimoto's. Who does it affect? It's estimated to be about 2% of people worldwide. That's an average. It varies by country. So you're more likely to see it in more prosperous, more hygienic, generally, countries, kind of the same way you're more likely to see something like allergies. But it's not too huge of a difference. It's sometimes associated with a diet that has an excess of iodine, but that link is also, again, very small and not very fully understood. It's very likely underdiagnosed given to the long time that you have with Hashimoto's before it starts having symptoms, and that many of those symptoms just might not present in somebody with Hashimoto's. And it is most prevalent in middle-aged women. It is actually by far most prevalent in women in general. If you take 20 people with Hashimoto's, 19 of them are going to be women and 1 of them is going to be a man. So why are so many of these patients women? Some of the answers are about the same for just autoimmune disorders in general, that women have more aggressive immunological responses. But this is a really big disparity. This is bigger than some other ones. So there's some research into why there's such a large amount of women that have this compared to men. And one interesting thing with Hashimoto's is that it often gets better in pregnancy and then worse in postpartum for women and mothers who become pregnant while sick with this disease. And that sort of indicates that hormones that are upregulated during pregnancy might have something to do with the suppression of autoimmune attacks, or just might downregulate other things that are associated with autoimmune attacks. There's also the fact that during pregnancy, the mother and the baby exchange cells. It's called microchimerism. And that process that just occurs is generally more likely to cause autoimmune activity afterwards. So then the mechanism of how these cells are working. Another interesting thing about this is I said lymphocytes earlier are getting lodged up in the tissue. They're there in equal amounts for both B cells and T cells. The antibodies that are present are often thyroglobulin antibodies, so they're specifically targeting the thyroid and nothing else. They tend to target the follicular cells with the thyroid a lot. You can see here kind of cut off. Oh, actually, let me go back. This electron microscopy image of tissue from a thyroid for someone with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, that these dark spots are areas that are very electron rich, and they are electron rich because of all the IgG that's just kind of lodged in there. So there's also a lot of cytokines present. They're assumed to be killing by the fast cell pathway. Not entirely clear if they are or if they aren't, but generally if they're there, they're probably doing that. And there's also a variant of CTLA4 that is associated with this disease by a gene analysis that might lead to T cells inappropriately targeting the thyroid. So as all these cells just kind of set in and they just sit there and they cause inflammation in general, they bring more cells. A lot of cells are trying to kill tissue, kill the cells of the thyroid. They destroy tissue. As more and more tissue is lost to the thyroid, it loses its ability to store iodine, which is really important to its function, and to then produce and regulate hormones. Over a long period of time, as this is happening, the thyroid is just going to become fibrotic. So the diagnosis of the thyroid is primarily by evaluating its function. You do a blood test. An elevated amount of TSH indicates that there's a thyroid problem. The body is calling out for, hey, why aren't you working? Do what I need you to do. Also, a low T3 and a low T4 indicates much the same thing, that the thyroid's not doing what it's supposed to do. The antibody titers against things, like I mentioned before, the thyroglobulin, really define that the cause of the thyroid dysfunction is autoimmune, and that this is a case of Hashimoto's. Another common evaluation is of the thyroid itself, that the doctor will kind of feel and say, oh, is there a goiter there that you can see? Is there something you could feel that shouldn't really be there? You can try to look for if the thyroid is grown because of the fibrosis or if it's just reduced and missing. You can also do this by ultrasound, not just feeling it. And the ultrasound, there's some really cool images they can get sometimes where you can tell, oh, that's not what that tissue is supposed to look like. That looks really weird. And again, indicates Hashimoto's. Over here on the right, you've got I'm assuming, fake thyroid test, which is someone who ultimately turned out to be normal. There's the range of where each of these three hormones should be, and then there's what the hormones are, and they're within range, meaning that this person has a reasonably functioning thyroid. So looking at your treatment options for Hashimoto's, the first one, levothyroxine prescription, is going to be always present. It's going to be the one that a doctor always goes with if someone has Hashimoto's, and it is simply a replacement for thyroid hormone. That your thyroid isn't able to produce it, you take it synthetically. And that has the TSH calming back down because it's finally getting what it needs, so it goes back to normal levels in your serum. And all you really do is you get regularly seen by an endocrinologist who draws the blood for the same tests that we just saw again, probably once every year, to see how much you're at and how much you need, and if they're going to increase it that time or not, because they are just going to keep increasing this. This treatment is lifelong. You do not go off of it once you go on it. You are going to continue losing your thyroid, and they are going to continue replacing its function with this medication. Getting on levothyroxine relatively early can prevent having a goiter and even shrink one a whole lot better than getting on it much later. And then the second sort of treatment option available to a doctor is surgery. It's really rare. It's mostly done if you have a goiter that's causing you pain, or there's a concern that this is going to become cancerous here. And after surgery, again, the continuing treatment is going to be levothyroxine. It's just going to be automatically increased to 100% of what your thyroid was doing because now you have no thyroid. And these are my references.